Lords, it's a pleasure to join many others in welcoming a fellow former newspaper editor to your Lordship's house. I'm sure Baroness Fleet will be a great addition to our ranks, and I particularly welcome her comments about encouraging the creative industries and I hope creative education. And I hope she has considerable influence on the front bench, both in the government side, both in your Lordship's house and also in the other place. And I note that she arrives on the day that we had the dreadful news that the University of Sheffield plans to close its archaeology department, its world-leading, world-renowned archaeology department. And I hope that she will pick up also advocacy for archaeology as a subject that explores and helps us understand the creativity of the past that can inform our lives in the present. Now, I think we've had a very interesting and wide-ranging debate, and I do have to pick up one point from the Noble Lord, Lord Bates, and echo his praise for the volunteers who contribute so much to so many of our communities. But I'm afraid I don't share his confidence of the capacity of volunteers to pick up more and more and more responsibilities when we have an increasing pension age, pressures of low wages, high rents, long working hours, and of course reduced government services that leave many with increased care responsibilities within their families and among their friends. From libraries to lunch clubs, volunteers have been asked to do more and more. Now, I find myself in an unusual situation today in welcoming a government bill and entirely agreeing with the Noble Lady, the Minister's introduction, that we have here proposed a sensible use for money parked in obscure places doing nothing. Now, what we're talking about is potentially a further £880 million for social and environmental initiatives. We're building on an existing scheme that has provided more than £745 million for charities and social enterprises in the past decades. That's £75 million a year. Sounds nice when you say it like that. But I'd like to put that figure in the context of the financial sector, of which we're drawing on a very small part here. If we look at the amount of money lost in corporate tax revenue because of money placed in tax havens, that's estimated to be between $500 billion and $600 billion a year. From high net worth individuals, it's estimated that around the globe, lost tax revenues are about $200 billion a year. The Minister spoke about money languishing, sitting around doing nothing. Well, that's what that money is doing in tax havens, not being used to fund the real economy, not being used to circulate in the kind of communities that we're looking to enrich. And just for full clarity, those figures come from an article called Tackling Tax Havens, published in Finance and Development, September 2019, by Nicholas Shaxton, which is a journal published by the IMF. So what we're talking about here is not so much peanuts as the crumbs of peanuts. And it is a measure of the public hunger that for even crumbs, the warmth with which this bill has been greeted in your Lordship's house. Now, I want to particularly, in looking at the detail of the bill, focus on Clause 29, as has the briefing that I'm sure many Noble Lords received from the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, which focuses on the way, as many Noble Lords, including, and I can't list them all, but the Noble Lady Baroness Barker and the Noble Lord Lord Hodgson of Ashley Abbots, that once again we're in Henry VIII territory of governments being able to simply readjust the direction, change what is happening with very little reference to any kind of democratic structure. Now, Clause 29 contains a legal duty to consult. I would suggest, and I'd very much like to talk to other Noble Lords who might like to join me in this, that what we should see is a legal duty to see this money directed towards the most disadvantaged areas of the country. Disadvantaged areas measured by objective, agreed, generally academically accepted means, criteria, not something dreamed up by the government. It's one of the ways in which the European Union was always much more democratic than the UK in that money explicitly allocated to disadvantaged communities actually had to go to disadvantaged communities using objective agreed criteria. Now, the Noble Lord Taylor of Holbeach said that one campaign group had expressed concern that there was a danger of this becoming a slush fund. I can only agree with that campaign group and thank the Noble Lord for highlighting this, because this reflects the concerns in many quarters. What we've seen with other funds originated by the government is what are essentially pork barrels being dropped by helicopters into chosen places. Now, the Noble Lady Baroness Lister of Berkhamsted said that focused on the idea of a community wealth fund, and she explored that at considerable length, so I won't go into the same length as I was planning to, but noting that 400 community groups have backed that idea, and as the Noble Lady stressed, what's really crucial is local decision-making in how these funds are allocated and how they're used. We have the most centralised polity in Western Europe. Far too much power and resources is concentrated here in Westminster. We need to transfer the power and the resources, the decision-making, out into communities. Now, in my final short section, I feel like I probably need to declare my position as Vice President of the Local Government Association, because the Noble Lady, the Minister, in her introduction said, "We're making sure this cannot be used as a substitute for central government funding." Well, I'd like to see that as a theory, but I would say there is absolutely no alternative but that this money will be used in that way, given the level of austerity of the past decade. Since 2010, we've seen a reduction, 2010 to 2020, we've seen a reduction in funding to local government of £16 billion. You might like to contrast that with the kind of total figures we're talking about through this bill. Local councils have lost 60p in the pound of money from Westminster to spend on local services. What we're seeking to do with the money from these funds is to put a plaster on a gaping wound of deprivation and destruction of community services. Nonetheless, this is a small positive, but if we really want to tackle the issues that affect so many communities on these islands, if we really want to spread prosperity around our land, what we actually need to do, circling back to where I started, is to ensure that rich individuals and multinational companies pay their taxes. And that requires a government that wants to make rich individuals and multinational companies pay their taxes. Thank you, my lords.